population is very small. The story about the Dakota tribes close to the Twin Cities areas is tragic, really.
Because it's so small?
Because the reason why their population base is so small is because of the history in Minnesota of Dakota people being just completely pushed out of Minnesota. Those few Dakota people that came back scratched out a living, you know, during the 1900s up until the 1990s, whenever they started to do these gaming operations. I'm good friends with some of those folks. I know their parents and how they made a living during that period of time. It was incredible poverty. Their small population side is a result of the history of the way Dakota people were treated in the state of Minnesota, and the fact that they made a living and scratched out a living and established a base and created a base to eventually end up with these kind of casinos says a lot for their tenacity and their ability to make it work.
Okay, in show prep, we talked a little bit about the Indian hanging in Mankato in 1862,
Right.
and how that colors the sort of the two lenses through which a lot of people look at Fort Snelling. Fort Snelling, the Historical Society almost has I shouldn't say anything derogatory about it, but it has a very positive view of Fort Snelling and how it fit in American culture. And to Native people, it's almost, why don't you fill in the blank?
Well, I mean, if you think about the displays that are there, the tourist activities, the historical recreations that are there, you know, it's beautiful stuff. You know, it makes you feel proud to be in Minnesota, and yet the total story of it is very dramatic. As a result of the treaty making process in the 1800s, and the kind of increasingly smaller and smaller land base that Dakota people had. And the kind of arrangements with treaties that they had to accept this much smaller land base in return for annuities and food goods and other things. That kind of history in the 1850s and the early 1860s with kind of the traders and people that were controlling those foodstuffs that were supposed to be made available to Dakota people. And it just wasn't made available. It was siphoned off, it was stolen, it was, you know, sold for cash, whatever.
It was swindled and it led to violence.
And it led to violence, right? And that violence was dramatic. A lot of people got killed on both sides, absolutely. The end result of it, though, was a complete eradication of Dakota people from the state of Minnesota. In 1863, you know, the kind of conflict, the violence, ended in 1862. In December 26 of 1862 with the hanging of 38 Dakota people, the largest single mass hanging in American history, right? The subsequent issue of that was their family members were kept at Fort Snelling in basically a concentration camp, an internment camp. And they were kept there from December to May, so 6 months virtually. Of just, you know, during the worst part of the year in Minnesota. I mean, we all live here, we all know what those months are like, right? And just complete squalor. Over a third of their population died just sitting there and seeing their loved ones being taken off on Christmas Day to be hanged the day after Christmas in Mankato. And then the rest of them, I can't remember the exact number, but somewhere around 600 people that were left by the time they put them on a steamboat and sent them south to a reservation in Iowa, and then after 3 years there, sent them to a reservation in Nebraska. And federal legislation was passed in May of 1863 that made it illegal for any Dakota people to even exist in the state of Minnesota. A $25 bounty was put on scalps of Dakota people. It was completely illegal. It was legal to kill a Dakota person and present their scalp to get the $25.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so that's the nature of Fort Snelling for Dakota people and most Indian people across the country as it relates to that history and that story. That federal legislation is still on the books.
Let's tie it to the positive work the foundation is doing and to what it means right here in St. Paul.
The Indian Land Tenure Foundation organizes our mission. We talked a little bit about why help Indian nations get their land back, right? Given the nature of land tenure ownership within reservations, the need to create some stability, one of the objectives or one of the ways of doing that is helping Indian nations to gain control of their land base through buying it back. They buy their own land back that was taken from them and given away to white people, right? And as a part of that overall mission, we have 3 strategy areas. Education is the primary one. We put over 90% of our funds into education strategies, education programs. Cultural revitalization is the second, economic development is a third, and law reform is the fourth. And in that work, as I said before, over 90% of our money goes to education projects. One of the major ones that we did recently was here in St. Paul. The St. Paul Public School systems took land tenure curriculum that we created, worked with it to tell the story of the Ojibwe and Dakota land tenure history, and implemented throughout their entire school system. They made it a required part of their social studies classes, with about 4 of the lessons being required to be taught by each social studies class. So all the students coming through the St. Paul Public School system learn a little bit about what Indian land is about, what the story is here in the United States, and what some of the issues are for opportunity and engaging. So with that kind of idea of educating people, not just Indian people, but all people about land and land tenure, and not just from the legal issue, but also the social and cultural and historical perspective, right? What does land mean to people from a cultural sense and a social sense? And so creating lesson plans, making them available to people, teachers, students, so that they're utilizing the school system as much as possible. We make that curriculum available to any teacher or school system to use free of charge, and we offer grants to them to help with the adaptation that is necessary. Whenever a teacher can speak to the nature of land that we're standing on, right? What the story of it is, what the quality of it is, how different people can look at a piece of land from very different perspective. Not just a difficult perspective of Fort Snelling, but also the nature of what a bluff means and what opportunity it creates to an Indian person, whether it's a man or a woman, to really connect spiritually, connect with the earth and understand that relationship. Learning that, learning about the differences, engaging in a dynamic sort of way is really powerful.
It must be very difficult to get schools to engage any of that, given No Child Left Behind, that all of the children's time is allocated and they must be studying facts about Paul Revere and memorizing things that maybe not as relevant to someone who lives here in Minnesota looking at a local issue.
That's exactly right, and it requires vision not only from within St. Paul Public Schools, the superintendent, they were in transition at the time, but even within transition, the superintendent recognized the value of it and communicated that to the people that were really most important, which is the principals, right? So you get principals who understand the opportunity, and they share that information with their teachers, knowing full well that those teachers are very, very stressed. Are they going to take on another thing that they're going to have to teach? Not only is it that issue of taking on another thing, but they don't know this stuff themselves. This is not material that is taught in our school systems. It's not taught in their teacher certification programs. And so they're not naturally knowledgeable about this information. But that was the real value of the St. Paul Public Schools. They made it work. Okay,
we got about a minute left. Okay. Tell me the most interesting program or thrust that the Indian Land Tenure Foundation is doing right now.
You know, to me, the one thing that we really haven't talked about much is law reform. And in our law reform efforts, we're working to really define what the greatest problems are with law reform. The federal government has a plenary power over Indian nations. Under the law, they can do anything they want. They can terminate, they can get rid of. There is no protection for the existence of Indian nation. And that's one of the issues that we're looking to reform as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Terry.
You're welcome.
I've been talking to Terry Janis, a program officer at the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. That's it. We'll see you next week on the St. Paul Forum.